Boldwood presents Fire and Forget, written by Andrew Warren and read by Jeff Harding. Chapter 1. Neil walked at a steady pace, ignoring the infernal sun that beat down on his back. He kept his eyes on the long dirt path ahead of him, watching for potholes or debris. Rockets and mortar fire had long since blasted away the road's chipped pavement. Fragments of rusted metal and deep holes now gouged its uneven surface. The debris was a dangerous reminder of the town's bleak past. The sun-baked mud road stretched through what was once the town center and led past the charred remains of the old colonial structures. Crumbling churches, dilapidated manor houses, and the burned, desecrated shell of the once pristine town hall. The old buildings seemed like relics of a fantastical era, a forgotten paradise, long since abandoned by whatever strange inhabitants once lived there. A white stone plaque remained standing near the ruined buildings. Soot and ash covered its carved surface, but the writing underneath was still legible. It marked the town's name as Caine, but Neil knew the place had gone by other names. From European colonists to Sudanese armed forces, and finally to the warring factions of the newly independent South, this tiny scrap of land had changed hands many times in its bloody war-torn history. Other people traipsed along both sides of the dirt road. Like Neil, they carried supplies in scavenged backpacks or threadbare sacks. A few of the town's inhabitants had set up makeshift stores along the route. They sold food, purified water, oil, and other valuables. The produce was bruised and insect-ridden, but Neil knew he had to grab whatever he could find. Food of any sort had become a priceless treasure, despite the efforts of the United Nations and other charitable groups. He crossed over the invisible boundary that separated the old town from the new encampment. The packed, hardened clay of the road became softer, soaked with sewage and refuse. The sun blasted down on the shanties and tents, baking the inhabitants and the filth surrounding them. The air itself seemed to thicken into a miasma of decay and suffering. As he maneuvered between the narrow rows of tents and carts, Neil listened to the chatter and voices around him. Despite the aura of death and despair, the town's inhabitants did their best to keep their spirits up. He walked past a row of children, all lined up in the street, books and bundled lunches balanced atop their heads. A group of mothers, draped in mud-stained sarongs and other rags, kissed the children on their cheeks. They sang to them in a hodgepodge of languages and dialects. He could make out smatterings of Nuer, Dinka, French, and English, among others. The children would soon begin the long hike to Bentiu. The tiny town, nestled near the banks of the White Nile River, was in better shape than Caine. Its buildings had been renovated by gas and oil companies, and the local orphanage had a fence with a lock. The children would be safer there at night than they would be in the tents and hovels of the camp. And night was when the raiders came. It had been many months since the last raid. After he and his family had arrived in Caine, the fighting between the South Sudan armed forces and the rebel groups to the east had died down. Neil's wife, Aya, began to speak of better times and impending peace as she served tea to the elders outside their shack. But Neil and his family had fled their hometown in the dead of night after armed men had ransacked his village for supplies. He had seen the flames of hatred and cruelty in the invaders' eyes as they lined the town's men up against a wall. Then they blindfolded the male children in the village and ordered them to execute their fathers. Those who complied were taken as soldiers or slaves. Those who refused or cried too much were mutilated. Neil heard the gunshots echoing one by one through the sweltering dark night as he and his family fled. When the men were dead, They moved on to the women and the young girls. Their screams and wails of despair carried for miles. Neil could hear them all through the night as they ran. After that night, his heart had changed. He knew the violence and bloodshed that engulfed these lands could not be erased by time or words. Perhaps his son might live long enough to see an end to the fighting. But for Neil, hopes of peace in his lifetime were not worth the saliva he spat onto the muddy, stinking road. Up ahead, set apart from the other tents and huts, was the shack that gave him and his family shelter. He had built it himself, using sheets of corrugated plastic provided by a nearby UN refugee camp. An older man, his beard and hair white as ash, sat outside in a folding chair next to a battered old table. He sipped hot tea, admiring the young women as they sauntered by. A tall, healthy-looking local woman emerged from the shack, carrying a chipped porcelain jar. She set it down on the tiny table.
"There you go, sir. All the sugar we have left. Sorry for the wait."
One of the old men reached for the spoon.
"No worries, Aya. Tea is good as it is. Red, dark." "Gondolosi tea," she said, refilling his cup. "Good for the blood."
Neil could not help but smile as he ducked under the plastic tarp that shaped the tiny porch.
"That's not all it's good for, Aya. You trying to give old Talak's wife here a surprise?"
Aya beamed at Neil.
"You're back."
She set down the teapot and rushed over to him, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace.
"Don't you listen to him," she said over her shoulder to the old man. "That's just old wives' tale."
Neil set down his sack and removed a few items, setting them down along the sides of the tea house.
"Here, I got you more sugar. Only one bag, though."
Aya took the tiny brown paper bag and refilled the sugar bowl on the table.
"Price go up again? Soon they will want a drop of blood for an ounce of sugar."
Talak laughed and set a collection of crumpled notes on the table.
"Thank you, Aya. May I come back tomorrow, see if wife wants me to drink more tea, and share more war stories with your guest."
He chuckled as he ambled out into the street.
"You better come back,"
Neil called after him.
"Or Aya tells your wife that you flirt with all the girls."
As the old man wandered into the street, Neil continued unpacking his bag of goods. He turned to Aya.
"And how is our guest?"
he asked in a low voice. She glanced at the street, then whispered,
"Better, I think. The tea and food seem to have helped, but the neighbors saw him bathe early this morning."
Neil nodded.
"It cannot be avoided. Talak was a soldier. He can be trusted. But the others will gossip. Word will spread. We have repaid this man's kindness. Tomorrow he must leave."
Aya bit her lip, then put her arm on Neil's shoulder.
"His wounds have not yet healed. Maybe he stays a few more days. If he had not found Buri on the outskirts of camp before nightfall—"
Neil nodded.
"You know I feel the same, but it is dangerous keeping him here. If word gets out—"
Before Neil could finish his sentence, an explosion tore through the street. He threw Aya to the ground, shielding her body with his own. He felt fire lick his back, and an immense wave of heat rippled through the air. His ears were ringing. He had not even noticed the sound of the explosion, but the after effects left him almost deaf. He could just make out people screaming and the crackle of nearby gunfire. Everything was muted, muffled by the incessant buzzing that filled his skull. Aya was crying and screaming. Her voice sounded far away, like she was trapped in a deep well. Neil staggered to his feet. He took a tentative step towards the shack, but his body swayed like a drunk. Another explosion rocked the town. He saw fragments of burning plastic and corrugated metal cascade into the air. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Neil had only managed to take a few steps towards his shack, but all around him the destruction and bloodshed seemed to grow. Gunfire crackled and sprayed in all directions. Bodies collapsed in the streets. Another shack exploded into debris as a barrage of rocket-propelled grenades screamed through the air. He realized he was walking in a tight circle, stunned by the chaos erupting around him. Hot liquid stung his eyes. He reached up and touched his forehead. He felt fresh, sticky blood spilling from a jagged gash.
"Buri! Where is Buri?"
Aya cried out. She ran into the shack. Neil started to follow her, but he stopped and stood in the doorway. The sound of a powerful engine roared towards him. He turned to see an armored truck barreling down the street. The vehicle plowed through the scattered debris, crushing the bodies of the fallen villagers into the mud. The Ural 63099 Typhoon armored vehicle was painted in khaki and brown camouflage. A heavy machine gun turret protruded from the roof. Neil saw no gunner manning the weapon, but its barrel flashed and roared. It spat a barrage of slugs towards a squad of SPLA soldiers who had taken cover down the street. They returned fire, but the massive weapon cut them down in seconds. The vehicle screeched to a halt in front of Neil's shack. His jaw dropped in surprise. He knew the armed forces of Sudan used such vehicles north of the border, but they were far too expensive for the raiders and rebel forces that caused trouble in the White Nile region. The rear doors swung open, and Nigerian music blasted from the truck's dark interior. The thumping bass of the song seemed even louder than the gunshots and explosions that continued to decimate the camp. A tall, slim East African man stepped out of the vehicle. He wore a navy pinstripe suit, and a leather bolo tie hung from the collar of his pressed white dress shirt. He sniffed the air and nodded, as if oblivious to the violence that surrounded them. A bullet ricocheted off the truck next to him. He turned and looked at the mark the bullet had left. Then he looked back at Neil, his face devoid of all expression. Two more men flanked him, dressed in scavenged military uniforms. They carried assault rifles and wore red sashes tied around their right arms. More armed men poured out of the truck and took up positions behind them. Their lanky bodies were draped in tattered rags and clothes, and they all wore similar red armbands. The man in the suit walked over to Neil and looked him up and down. He grinned, revealing a set of yellow mangled teeth. His left front incisor was missing. A tiny polished diamond sat in place of the missing tooth. Unlike most stones, this one was not clear. It held a pale red tint and glowed with an inner fire as a beam of sunlight struck the man's face.
"Your name is Neil. Do you know who I am?"
The stunned younger man nodded. He swallowed.
"Yes, I know. We want no trouble,"
Neil stuttered.
"Please, take whatever."
The man did not stop grinning.
"We are not thieves, my good man. I am told you have something that belongs to me. This is true?"
"Leave him alone," a man's voice called from inside the shack. He limped out into the light. His Caucasian skin was flushed, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead beneath short brown hair. His tan, sunburned skin crinkled around his eyes as he squinted at the other men. He took another step and winced in pain. His shirt was unbuttoned, and a dark stain soaked the cloth bandage that was tied around his abdomen. "I'm the one you want." He glared down at the man with the red diamond tooth. "Isn't that right?" The uniformed men surged into the cabin. Neil heard screams from inside. One man dragged out a struggling Aya and a slim young boy.
"Buri, don't you hurt him, or—"
"Why you come here?"
the boy cried out.
"Why you take him? He help us. He bring medicine from America."
The other soldier emerged from the shack carrying a canvas rucksack. He handed the bag to the man with the diamond tooth.
His things, Commander.
The commander took the bag. He stepped over to the boy and rubbed his head with rough, calloused fingers.
This stranger is not who he seems to be, young one,
he said, nodding toward the injured man.
He is no angel. He is a demon, an evil spirit. His kind do not care about you. They care only for what they can take, what they can steal from our home. Isn't that right, Mr. Galloway?
The white man shrugged. You must have me confused with someone else. My name's Carter. I work for the World Health Organization. You and your dogs are the only demons I see around here. The man with the diamond tooth rummaged through the rucksack and pulled out a small silver metal case. He dropped the bag and flipped open the case. An icy white mist crept out, evaporating in the morning heat. He peered inside the case for a moment, his eyes wide and searching. Then he snapped it shut and handed it to one of his men.
Your name is Josh Galloway, and you work for the American CIA,
he said in a sing-song voice. He tapped the side of his skull next to his left eye.
You see, I have my own demons, my own spirits. They see through your lies. You stole 2 of these cases from me. Where is the other one?
I told you, I don't know what you're talking about. I was carrying medicine samples and...
You anger the spirits, Mr. Galloway. Soon enough, they show us both the truth, I think. Yes, you will be begging to talk once they start to whisper in your ear. Put him on the truck.
One of the guards prodded the man called Galloway with the butt of his rifle. Josh winced in pain. He glared at the 2 soldiers for a second, then allowed himself to be led to the back of the truck. I'm sorry, he whispered as he stumbled past Neil. The men shoved him into the back of the idling vehicle.
Very good, the man in the suit said, clapping his hands. Now, Neil, my friend, you have taken 2 things from me. This man, Mr. Galloway, and the property he has stolen from me. So, I will take 2 things from you. First, I take your family.
No, please, I give you anything. Take me, take...
The man in the suit held up his hand and looked away. 2 more men grabbed Neil. They kicked and pummeled him, forcing him to the ground.
Have no fear. They will help us in our glorious purpose. They will serve us, just as we serve Almighty God.
The second soldier dragged Aya and Buri, kicking and screaming, towards the truck. 2 of the other men grabbed Neil's right arm and held it over the wood table. The man in the suit slipped open his blazer, revealing a long silver machete hanging from a leather sheath under his arm. He slid out the blade and held it up in the morning sun, admiring the way the light glinted off the sharp edge.
Please, Neil moaned. Please, you can kill me. Do whatever you want to me. Just leave my son.
The man smiled again. His tooth reflected red beams of light, like lasers dancing across the interior of the shack.
Don't worry, good sir. I'm not gonna kill you. But this man, this Mr. Galloway, he take a great treasure from me. So I must take more from you. Otherwise, people everywhere, they think they can steal from me. They think they can steal from our glorious cause, and nothing will happen to them. And our country, our home. We have enough thieves here, don't you think? Thieves from outside and thieves from within. But now, maybe all these thieves see men like you, and they know better.
Neil looked up as the man raised the blade. He stared into his eyes, expecting to see the same hate and cruelty he had seen in the men who had raided his village. But instead, he saw nothing but pale white orbs. The man's eyes had rolled back into his head, as if he was having a spasm or seizure of some kind. Then the blade descended, and Neil screamed. Chapter 2. A hot breeze cut across the waters of the Louisiana bayou, and the late afternoon sun cast dappled waves of golden light over its choppy surface. Rows of black cypress trees lined the banks on either side of the wide expanse of water. Long trails of Spanish moss hung from their lower branches, kissing the dark water's surface. John Blaine eyed the thick vegetation from the rear seat of the airboat as it roared across the water. A flash of motion caught his eye. He turned his head and spotted a lumbering 6-foot alligator slide down the muddy bank into the water. The huge reptile disappeared beneath the rippling surface. Predators, Blaine thought. In the world outside, Blaine considered himself a powerful man. He was the director of national intelligence. He coordinated and assessed intel from the CIA, NSA, FBI, and others. Operations, personnel, budgets, planning, and execution. All aspects of America's vast intelligence apparatus felt his influence. And in addition to his personal status, he had the ear of the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States. It was his job to brief the President on all intelligence matters relating to national security. His recommendations held tremendous sway in the White House. But that was back in Washington, back among the secure tree-lined streets and pristine white government buildings. Great Falls, McLean, Arlington, the high-priced suburbs with their malls, mansions, and 5-star restaurants. As DNI, his actions affected the entire world. But the further he ventured from the capital, the more he felt his own sense of personal power begin to crumble. Out here, he found himself surrounded by an endless expanse of black water and dense groves of gnarled trees. A beautiful but lonely sunset burned across the sky above. Here, he could sense that he had fallen even lower on the food chain. "You're not a predator," he thought, as the airboat drifted around another bend in the river. "Predators are pure, of single mind and purpose. You're not pure. You're compromised." How had he allowed this to happen? How had he fallen so far? Up ahead, a massive bird exploded from the vegetation and took flight. Blaine watched, stunned, as a pair of 4-foot white wings flapped through the air, their powerful beating driving the large bird up and over the airboat. It screeched and swooped low over the deck. As Blaine ducked, he spotted a patch of red pigment decorating the black skin of the animal's throat. The bird spiraled up into the sunburst sky. It beat its wings, then disappeared into the shadowed canopy of gnarled trees and moss. "Big fucking bird, right?" the pilot shouted behind him. Blaine turned around and looked up. The pilot sat in an elevated seat that gave him a better view of the waterline and floating vegetation. A sly grin was plastered across his lean, hawkish face. "I couldn't believe it when I first saw one of those things myself. It's called a jabberoo. South American crane, believe it or not. Been spotted around these parts recently." "Fascinating," Blaine snapped back. He raised his voice, shouting over the deafening engine noise. He turned to the man next to him. "How much farther are we going? I can't be gone all day. Sooner or later I'll be missed." The man, a beefier, taciturn hunk of sinew and muscle, pointed ahead. "Right around the next bend, sir." "And how long is this ridiculous rendezvous expected to take?" Blaine asked. He hoped the roar of the engine would cover the quiver of fear hiding behind his words. The bigger man shook his head. No idea. Our orders are to bring you to the meeting, but we'll wait outside while you have your conference. Blaine nodded. Very good. Although they acted as bodyguards, Blaine knew these men were not loyal to him. They were handlers, assigned to make sure he followed instructions with a minimum of fuss. If he made things difficult, if he refused to obey his summons, they, in turn, would make things difficult for him. The pilot reached down from his perch and manipulated the twin control sticks mounted to the boat's deck. The left stick tilted the rudders behind the massive aircraft prop at the rear of the boat. The right stick controlled the throttle. The pilot pushed forward, increasing their speed across the water. He powered the boat into a long, graceful turn. The small craft circled around a lump of forested land that emerged from the swamp ahead. Blaine squinted. In the distance, a tiny shack came into view, nestled between the drooping branches of a cypress grove. The dense foliage blocked out what little sun was left, hiding most of the shack in shadow. You've got to be fucking kidding me, he shouted over the noise of the propeller. Here? He wants to meet here? The pilot eased back on the throttle. The propeller slowed. The boat drifted towards a rickety dock that extended from the shack. The lean man shrugged. His eyes were impossible to read behind his mirrored aviator sunglasses. Can't put a price on privacy, I guess. If I were you, I'd head on in, sir. Not wise to keep him waiting. The beefier man stepped out of the boat and lashed it to the dock with a yellow frayed nylon cord. He extended his hand, but Blaine ignored it. He stumbled a bit, but managed to step out of the listing boat and onto the dock. The wood creaked beneath his weight. The man nodded towards the shack. We'll wait out here to take you back when it's over. Shouldn't be long. Blaine grimaced. It's already been too long. He forced himself to turn his back on the men and took a few steps toward the shack. Behind him, the sun dipped lower on the horizon. The patches of light on the water shifted to orange and blood red, mirroring the thick painted clouds in the sky. The door to the shack creaked open. Inside, Blaine found a tiny room with rotted wood flooring and boarded-up windows on each wall. No line in the structure seemed to be straight. A small wooden desk sat at the rear of the room, but there was no other furniture in the dark, cramped space. Blaine turned and gave one last look at the two men waiting for him on the dock. They stood motionless, staring back at him. Blaine exhaled and shut the door, cutting off the sliver of light from outside. The glowing screen of a laptop computer cast a square of light on the rear wall. Blaine spotted a thick orange power cable running from under the desk. It snaked through a hole in the wall. Must be a generator outside, he thought. They were miles from civilization and any source of power. Blaine walked to the desk and sat down. A logo filled the screen. Delta Blue Security. No other information was displayed on the monitor. He picked up a small Bluetooth earbud from the desk and slipped it into his ear. Then he removed a tiny USB key from the pocket of his khaki pants. He inserted it into the computer. The screensaver dissolved, replaced with a video conference panel. The screen split into 3 windows. 3 faces stared back at him, each one masked by shadow and distortion filters. The secure conference software masked their identities in case the signal was intercepted. But Blaine knew each of the men behind those blurred faces. He knew how dangerous they could be. Christ, Blaine, can't you ever be on time? The voice distortion could not mask the impatient, arrogant tone, nor the thick southern accent of the man in the center window. Blame your men. They were my chauffeurs for this meeting. I'm all for security, but isn't this taking privacy a bit far? When I told you I wouldn't be available to meet in New Orleans, I didn't think you meant the middle of the swamp. You know who I am. I can't just disappear for hours at a time. Watch your tone, son. It's thanks to your fuck-up that this level of security is necessary. Blaine narrowed his eyes. How do you figure that? Lipinski was your asset. I warned you that running ops in China in the middle of the president's talks could blow up in your face, and I also warned you, you an Elvis fan. Blaine blinked. What? Elvis, the king. He's got a song that's apropos in this situation. A little less conversation, a little more action, please. I don't. The voice interrupted him again. Warnings are well and good, but it doesn't take much to cry that the sky has fallen. Hell, even a broken watch is right twice a day. Question is, what are you gonna do to fix it? Blaine swallowed. Fix it? Lipinski is in FBI custody with CIA oversight. He's set to testify before a Senate committee in Washington. Lipinski was NSA. Last time I checked, you were the DNI, correct? You coordinate intel from the alphabet soup that serves our great nation's intelligence community. Oxymoron if I ever heard one. Now I know I'm an ignorant yokel compared to a fancy DC suit like yourself, but that is your job description, yes? Yes, but... So there's a question on my mind, John. How the hell did you coordinate this into such a colossal goddamn shit show on wheels?
Blaine could see no features on the shadowy figure's blurred face, but he could feel the man's eyes burning into him, observing his powerlessness, his fear. Rebecca Freeling, the new DNCS, she had an asset in China, he stammered. Someone the CIA didn't know about, someone who... I know all about her asset. Another voice this time, the head on the right. Blaine could make out the shape of wire-rimmed glasses resting across the blurred, gaunt face. A mistake, the man said, one that should have been rectified long ago. The man in the center grunted. Mistakes? Well, we've all made 'em. Lipinski, did he know you were involved? Blaine's words tumbled from his mouth as he struggled to regain control of the conversation. No, he never knew. I made sure to push him in the right direction, but I played dumb about his China asset, about you, about everything. The man laughed, a deep, low guffaw. Played dumb, huh? Yeah, you got that down for sure. Okay, I think we can get this under control. The man on the right nodded. I agree. I can handle Freeling's asset. In fact, he may even prove useful to us. The man on the left finally spoke. His voice was higher pitched than the other two men, with a lilting accent. What about the operation? We already set things in motion, committed manpower, acquired the necessary materials. The center figure's voice was firm and held the snap of a man used to being obeyed. The operation moves forward. We all have too much invested at this point. I'm not gonna let some pansy-ass NSA rat take us down now. Even if he doesn't know anything, I don't want Lipinski to take the stand. I want a total blackout on this, understood? Understood. The man on the right again. We have an asset of our own who can take care of that problem for us. Good. No more mistakes. Blaine stared at the screen and drummed his fingers on the desk. He realized he was no longer an active part of the conversation. He had been left out of their plans. He was not part of the solution. And what about me? He asked. I take it I'm free to return to New Orleans for my lecture? Gentlemen, why don't you give Mr. Blaine and myself some privacy here? The two other faces disappeared, and the center face swelled to fill the screen. Blaine leaned back in his chair as the face loomed before him. Once again, he could feel the man's unseen eyes burrowing into him. He knew the man could sense his weakness, his fear, even from across the digital gap that separated them. John, maybe I've been too hard on you.
Hell, like I said, we all make mistakes. I've made my share as well. I should have ridden you harder, made sure your head was in the game. Let's face it, you're a pencil pusher, a suit. You were a lawyer, right? Now, wait a minute here. I've served my country same as you. The man on the screen waved a hazy shadowed hand, and his voice softened. Now, calm down. I don't mean offense, just telling it like it is. Smarts, intelligence, political savvy, those qualities have value in the right circumstances. But I'm afraid we've gone beyond those circumstances now. Do me a favor, John. Open that drawer to your left, the little one on top. Blaine slid open the drawer. He reached inside, and his eyes widened. Inside the drawer, his fingers wrapped around the butt of a pistol. He lifted the gun up and examined it. It was a smooth, nickel-plated Ruger SR 1911, chambered in .45 ACP. The walnut grips were polished to a high sheen, but a single scratch marred the wood on the right side. Blaine recognized the mark. He had caused it when he had dropped the gun once during cleaning. This was his pistol, taken from his home. How did you... His voice trailed off as he realized his initial fears had been correct. There was blood in the water. His blood. The predator was moving in for the kill. Son, the man on the screen said, his voice smooth and soft as velvet. There comes a time in all our lives when we outlive our usefulness. It will come for me, sure enough. But today, it's come for you. I'm counting on you to do the right thing here. Blaine narrowed his eyes at the screen. The tiny red light next to the web camera blinked on and off, as steady and unchanging as a heartbeat. Wait, you mean... You can't expect me to... I can and I do. Life is full of shattered expectations, John. But I warn you, do not let me down here. There's more lives on the line now than yours. Blaine turned his eyes from the screen and stared at the gun in disbelief. He wanted to put it down on the desk, but somehow his arm and fingers refused to comply. I can't. I'm the Director of National Intelligence. John, do not test me. Once again, the cold snap of steel filled the man's voice. So you're the DNI. So what? You think that means anything? You think you have power? At the end of the day, you have the same power any man has. Kill or be killed. You botch things with Lipinski. He's a loose end now, and that makes you a loose end as well. I can't have that, John. I don't expect you to like it, but you must understand what has to be done. No, I won't. You do this for me, I'll make sure your family is taken care of, just like I promised. Your wife will never have to know the ugliness of need, of poverty, of fear, and your daughter will go to that expensive prep school you had your eye on. She'll live out her charmed life, spend her trust fund on sports cars and vacations with her friends. Blaine turned his eyes back to the screen. The voice paused. The shadowed figure leaned closer, filling the webcam's view with his warped face. Blaine heard the man tapping some keys on the other end of the digital call. The distorted mask disappeared. Blaine found himself staring into a single enormous blue eye. Craggy peaks and valleys of wrinkled skin surrounded the brilliant iris. The sudden clarity of the image was unsettling. Blaine was half aware of a noise outside, some kind of muted commotion, but he paid it no mind. He was unable to tear his attention away from the man on the screen. The eye rotated in its socket as the man stared at him. Blaine, Look into my eye. You know what I've seen, what I've done. I've killed men. In war, in peace, sometimes far away, sometimes up close and personal. I've felt hot blood on my hands, John. Do you know what that feels like? To feel a living thing lose that spark, go pale as the blood drains from its body? And then to look into their eyes and watch as that spark goes out for good? Permanent, John. There's a peace in that, knowing it's permanent. Their death is forever, and you're still alive. Have you ever felt that? Blaine shook his head. His lips mouthed words, but no sound came out. The commotion outside was louder. He heard wood splinter and crack. He looked up at the door, dragged from his hypnotic trance by the noise outside. The man on the screen continued speaking. You deny me now, John, and my men outside'll come on in and do the job for me. Won't look as good, murder instead of a suicide, but it's still manageable. But, John, if that happens, I swear to you, your family will find out what it feels like to see that spark go. They'll see it in each other's eyes, and then they'll see ugliness. Ugliness like I've seen. Decades of it, all compressed into a few short, painful days. And when they go, John, they'll know. They'll know it was your cowardice that made them suffer. I'll make sure of it. Blaine looked back at the screen. You fuck, God damn you, he whispered. Grow up, John, and grow a pair. Let's get this done. I don't have all day. Blaine swallowed. He imagined his wife and daughter, a family vacation to Disneyland years earlier, his daughter playing in the pool, learning to swim, his wife smiling at him, making love in their room, laughing, trying to keep their voices down. That was before he fell. He raised the gun to his head. That's it, John. You're doing the right thing, I promise. I thank you. And so will your family. Blaine pressed the barrel of the pistol against his temple. You motherfucking piece of... He continued to whisper a stream of curses. The man on the screen did not show any reaction, if he even heard them at all. Almost there, John. Come on, let's finish this and move on. No point in drawing things out. Again, the voice was velvet smooth, like a man speaking to a beloved pet. Suddenly, the shack's door crashed open. Blaine jumped out of his seat and took a step back. A body flew to the floor and rolled to a stop. It was the heavy-set man from outside, one of the men who had brought him here, one of his handlers. A second man charged into the shack. Blaine had never seen him before. He was tall, and his body was lean, taut, and muscular. He moved with the grace of a natural athlete, keeping his shoulders low to present a smaller target to any potential threats inside. Blaine watched as the heavier man reached down and slipped a tiny Smith & Wesson M&P pistol from a holster strapped above his ankle. He aimed the weapon, but before he could draw a bead, the other man lashed out with a powerful kick. The tiny pistol fired, but the kick threw the man's aim off. The bullet thudded into the shack's wooden roof. The other man raised a pistol, a Beretta PX-4 Storm Compact. The gun's roar was deafening in the tiny space of the shack. He fired twice, sending 2 bullets into the prone target's chest. The man's body spasmed as the bullets struck his flesh. A third shot opened a brilliant red circle in his forehead. He ceased thrashing. The shooter looked up at Blaine. A fringe of short brown hairs swept above his tan, chiseled face. Streaks of sweat and dirt covered his skin, as if he had crawled through the swamp and surrounding brush. The man was half hidden by darkness, but Blaine found himself staring into a pair of the greenest eyes he had ever seen. They looked like emeralds blazing out from the man's shadowy, haunted features. Blaine yelped as the man swung the gun in a two-handed grip and fired again. The laptop exploded into a shower of sparks and plastic shrapnel. "Drop the weapon! Do it now!" the man shouted in a commanding voice. Blaine released his hold on the gun, letting it fall and clatter to the warped wood floorboards. "Kick it towards me, gently." The mysterious shooter kept his distance from Blaine. He held the Beretta in a steady grip. Blaine kicked the pistol towards him. The shooter bent at the knees and picked up the weapon, never taking his eyes off Blaine.
"Whoever you are, we have to get out of here. We have to—"
Blaine tried to inject some authority into his voice, but he could barely speak above a terrified whisper. "Bernardo," the shooter said in a low, firm voice. "Where is Alan Bernardo?" Blaine blinked. "What? Listen, who the hell are you?" The man charged forward, flipping over the desk with one hand. The fragments of computer crashed to the floor as Blaine backed away in fear. Blaine found himself pinned against the wall by the man's powerful forearm. He snatched and clawed at the vice-like arm, but he could not pry himself from the iron grip. "I've been following you, Blaine. For over a month I've been your shadow. Alan Bernardo, former DNCS. He was one of the people on your little conference call, wasn't he? Tell me where he is."
"More men coming. Have to get out of here,"
Blaine hissed, struggling to form words. The man cocked his head toward one of the boarded windows and listened.
"Look, I'm the Director of National Intelligence. I can help you.
I know who you are. Shut up!" It was a faint, distant buzzing, almost inaudible against the sounds of the insects and birds in the swamp. But it was growing louder, closer. "Airboats, 2 or more. Friends of yours?" Blaine shook his head.
"With them. The men who brought me here. Men you killed."
The man released his arm, and Blaine slumped to the floor. "Then you have a choice to make. My name is Thomas Caine. You can come with me and tell me everything I want to know, or I can leave you for them." The DNA stumbled to his feet.
"Caine? Wait, I remember the reports. You're supposed to be dead."
The man named Caine glared at him with his emerald green eyes. To Blaine, he looked like a tiger guarding a fresh kill. This was a true predator. Blaine swallowed, then nodded. "Get me out of here and you have a deal. You hold out on me, and I swear, Blaine, I'll make you wish you pulled that trigger yourself. I'll tell you everything. Bernardo, the others, all of it." Caine stared at him for a second, then slid his Beretta into his waistband. The buzzing grew louder. He stalked towards the door, thumbing the safety on Blaine's Ruger as he moved. He racked the weapon's slide a quarter inch, checked the load, and then released the slide with a soft metallic clack. "Good choice. I came here on a fishing boat. My ride's long gone now, so we take the airboat on the dock. I'll cover you. Move. Now!" The 2 men exited the shack and charged towards the docked boat. The noise of the motors echoed between the dark groves of trees. Chapter 3. As they ran down the dock, Caine reached into his pocket and grabbed the key he had removed from the pilot's corpse. He leapt onto the bobbing deck of the boat and took a seat at the controls. He made sure to keep Blaine in the corner of his eye. "The mooring ropes, cast them off, now!" He slid the key into a yellow plastic ignition socket. Blaine hurried to untie the frayed nylon ropes at the stern and bow of the long, flat craft. "What happened to the pilot?" he asked as the loose cords slipped off the dock and into the boat's hull. "I left him for the gators," Caine said. "Same thing'll happen to you if you hold out on me. Now sit down." The noise of the other airboats grew louder. Caine turned the key and the rear-mounted propeller sputtered to life. Caine guided the boat away from the dock and pressed the throttle stick forward. As the engine roared, 2 shimmering metal boats sped around the riverbank. The airboats were unmarked, but they looked brand new. They were long, sleek, and built for speed, sporting carbon fiber propellers and nitrous tanks mounted next to the engines. Each boat held a pilot in a low-slung front-mounted seat and a 2-man team seated in the rear. They wore black polo shirts, jeans, and gray Kevlar vests. The men in the rear carried small bullpup assault rifles. Caine recognized the design. IWI Tavor. The weapons were Israeli-made and chambered for 5.56 NATO rounds. They were compact, reliable, and capable of burst and full automatic fire. The guns, the clothes, the boats, Caine thought. Money. Private contractors. Mercenaries, like the men who had brought Blaine into the swamp. Caine had scouted this area of the swamp days before. During his surveillance of Blaine, he had noted the 2 men from the dock tailing the DNI. He shadowed them as they followed Blaine throughout the city of New Orleans. Then he followed them into the swamp and observed as they had prepped the area in advance of the meeting. He watched while they rigged power from a generator, set up an antenna for satellite internet coverage, and secured the grounds around the shack. Then he waited, taking shelter in a hunter's hide, until the men reappeared with Blaine. The shack was on the outskirts of land owned by Delta Blue, a private military and intelligence company. Their main training facility was a 24-acre compound a few kilometers northeast of the shack. But if these mercenaries worked for Delta Blue, who had hired them? Caine pushed the questions from his mind. There would be time enough for answers once he questioned Blaine. Assuming they lived that long. As they sped away from the dock, Caine turned the boat to starboard and circled back around the little island. Outrunning the pursuers' boats would be difficult. The airboat that had transported the DNI was a civilian model, a far cry from the high-tech craft that were now closing in on his wake. As their pursuers moved closer, Caine slid Blaine's Ruger from his waistband. He looked back over his shoulder. The massive propeller and the wire safety cage that surrounded it blocked his line of fire. There was no way to get a clear shot at their pursuers. Blaine stood up and reached for the pistol. "Give me the gun. I can shoot." Caine slammed the butt of the pistol down on Blaine's face. The DNI crumpled back into his seat, a trickle of blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "I'm not stupid, Blaine," Caine shouted. "Stay down." A barrage of automatic gunfire erupted behind them. Caine ducked low in his seat as sparks flew off the safety cage. The shots had missed the propeller by inches. Keeping a loose grip on the gun, Caine wrapped his fingers around both control sticks. He jerked them in opposite directions, gunning the throttle and forcing the rudder full to port. As the boat pivoted, Caine eased up on the throttle. The boat sped sideways across the murky water, skipping across the water like a stone thrown from the shore. Now sideways, Caine had a clear shot. He twisted his body to the left and let go of the sticks. He used a double-handed grip to steady his aim as the boat bounced across the water. The gun roared in his hands as he sent a stream of bullets towards the lead airboat. Sparks flew from the boat's hull. 2 of his shots ricocheted off the metal, but the third struck the pilot. His body jerked backwards. Caine set the pistol down on the arm of his chair and pulled back on the sticks. A hail of return fire cut through the humid swamp air around them. "What the hell are you doing?" Blaine shouted. "You're gonna get us killed!" The boat straightened out. Caine pushed forward on the throttle again, speeding away from the boats behind them. The lead boat pursuers slowed down as one of the mercenaries pulled the injured pilot from his seat. The other boat surged forward. The 2 armed men on board fired short, controlled bursts into the rear of Caine's boat, causing a plume of smoke to billow from the propeller housing. Another lump of dark forested earth rose from the swamp ahead of them. Caine pushed the boat to starboard, hoping the smoke would throw off their pursuers. But the roar of the other boat soon caught up to them. More gunfire nipped at the water's surface. Stray branches and bits of moss clattered onto the deck as bullets tore through the surrounding foliage. The engine noise behind them grew louder. Their airboat lurched sideways and shuddered. The Ruger pistol flew from the chair and slid across the hull towards the back of the boat. One of their pursuers had managed to pull up along the starboard side of the boat and rammed them. The thick roots and gnarled trees of the island loomed to their port side. The boat's hull scraped against the raised land. "Damn it," Caine cursed. "How did they catch up so quickly?" Then he remembered the nitrous tanks. The two men in the rear raised their weapons to fire. Caine gunned the throttle, slamming into them again. The impact threw off their aim, sending the burst of bullets thudding into the deck. A stream of water sprayed from one of the holes in the hull of his boat. They were taking on water. Caine looked to his right and spotted a small metal tool bin bolted to the deck. "Blaine, make yourself useful. Open that toolbox. See if there's a bilge pump." Blaine eyed the stream of water filling the hull, then scrambled towards the bin. Caine yanked back on the stick, once again slamming into the other boat. More gunfire sliced through the air above them. The engine of the second boat roared closer. One of the other men must have taken the pilot's position, and now it was gaining on them. Blaine shouted over the loud prop wash. "There's a hammer, a box of nails, a flare gun, no pump." Caine glanced to his right. The setting sun cast a golden glow through the trees and vines. The dying rays of light reflected off the steel propeller cage and the silver nitrous tanks of the attacker's boat. "Grab the flare pistol and hold on," he shouted. He swung the boat again. The metal hull groaned as it slammed into their attackers. Blaine tumbled across the deck and thudded into the sidewall. Water continued to spray through the holes in the hull. Caine reached behind his back and drew his Beretta. As the men on the other boat recovered their balance, he locked his sights on their nitrous tanks. Blam! 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 The gun barked 3 times. A high-pitched metallic twang screamed through the air as the bullets struck their target. A pair of dark holes erupted in the middle of the tanks. Twin streams of liquid nitrous oxide spilled out onto the deck. Blaine struggled to sit up. He turned and aimed the flare pistol at the attacker's boat. "No!" Caine shouted, jerking the control stick to the right once more. "Wait, not yet!" The two boats clashed again. As they drifted apart, the men in the other boat ignored the ruptured tanks and opened fire. More slugs tore into the deck of Caine's boat. A 2-inch pool of swamp water now filled the bottom. Blaine gasped as a bullet struck his thigh. A thick cloud of blood mixed with the water as he fell backwards. "Blaine, get up! Shoot, now!" Blaine groaned and leaned over the side of the boat. Their attackers steadied themselves and prepared to fire again. Blaine extended his arm and aimed the flare pistol. His face was pale, and blood continued to pump from his wounded leg. Caine rammed into the attacker's boat one more time, struggling to keep the men off balance. "Fire!" Blaine pulled the trigger. A blinding red light sizzled from the barrel of the gun as the flare streaked out. For a split second, it lit up the dark trees and vines, surrounding them with a sinister crimson glow. Then it bounced onto the deck of the boat and exploded into a shower of sparks. The liquid nitrous oxide on its own was not flammable, but mixed with the oxygen in the air, the vapor became a highly flammable gas. In a fraction of a second, it accelerated the burning flare into a hellish inferno. The men shrieked as the flames licked at their flesh. Caine accelerated and sped past them as the flaming pyre that consumed their boat reached up into the sky. Then, with a loud whoosh, the remaining nitrous oxide in the tanks ignited. Caine looked back and saw a massive fireball erupt behind them as the boat exploded. His lips twisted into a grim smile. The burning fragments of the boat splashed and fizzled as they pelted the surface of the murky water. Blaine collapsed into the muddy puddle that was rising inch by inch, filling the inside of the airboat. Another round of gunfire erupted behind them. Caine ducked and cursed as more sparks ricocheted off the propeller cage. The second boat was still in pursuit. Caine worked the controls, weaving the boat back and forth across the river. The smoke trail that followed in his wake grew thicker and darker. He was not sure how much more punishment the engine could take. More gunfire screeched off the metal hull and sliced through the foliage on either side of them. The river was narrowing, and the two boats found themselves forced into a tight channel. The strip of water cut between two islands of mud-streaked land and gnarled trees. Caine squinted in the dim light. He could see a dark shadow blocking the way farther up the river. As the boats charged forward, the obstruction came into view. A rotted tree had toppled and hung suspended between the two riverbanks, cutting off the channel. There was only a foot or two of clearance beneath the enormous trunk. The airboats, with their top-mounted propellers, would not be able to pass under it. They were on a collision course. Chapter 4. Caine jerked the boat to starboard, smashing into his attackers as they pulled alongside him in the channel. From the corner of his eye, he could see the injured pilot lying across the deck. One of the other men had taken the controls. The third man knelt on the bow, aiming his rifle at them. Caine slipped his Beretta from his waistband and sent a burst of gunfire across the bow of their craft. His shots didn't hit anything, but they had the desired effect. The lone gunman scrambled for cover, ducking down below the edge of the metal hull. As the boat split apart, Caine spotted a dark clump rising up from the water off their bow. A thick, twisted column of roots jutted out from the shallow, muddy swamp. "Blaine, hold on!" Caine shouted. There was no time to avoid the obstacle. He pushed the throttle forward, and the engine roared louder. A metallic thunk rattled through the hull as they hit the roots. The impact launched the boat up and out of the water. Caine grabbed the handles of the pilot's seat as the airboat sailed through the air. For a split second, he felt weightless. Then his stomach lurched as they fell, crashing back into the river with a tremendous wet slap. As he wiped the spray off his face, Caine heard his pursuer's boat splash down next to them. Then he felt his boat shimmy and tilt in the water. One of the men from the other boat had jumped onto his deck. Caine saw the mercenary standing at the bow of the boat, swinging his rifle towards him. He yanked on the throttle, causing the man to stumble. Dropping the rifle, the mercenary charged forward as Caine slid out of his seat and raised his pistol. Before he could fire, he heard another loud thunk. He grabbed the side of the boat as they lurched into the air again. The boat had hit another clump of roots. The channel was getting shallower. A wave of muddy water sprayed through the air as they crashed back into the river. The boats continued racing forward. The Merc lunged towards him. Behind him, Caine could see the fallen tree looming downriver. The rotting trunk still blocked their path. The man closed in before Caine could fire. He slapped Caine's pistol aside with the open palm of his left hand. Caine instinctively knew what was coming. He had used the same move many times himself. These men have had training, he thought. They're good. The thug wrapped his fingers around the barrel of the weapon and pushed it down. He launched a right hook towards Caine's face. Caine ducked and raised his left elbow. His forearm deflected the punch, and the man was thrown off balance. Grabbing the shoulder strap of the man's rifle, Caine yanked him forward. He slammed the top of his skull into the bridge of the man's nose. The mercenary grinned in pain. Caine wrenched his pistol from the stunned thug's grip. The man staggered backwards, trying to put some distance between himself and Caine's fists. The airboat bounced across the water as it continued charging forward at full speed. It drifted right, scraping hulls with the other boat. The mercenary stumbled and fell, splashing in the muddy water that filled the airboat. They were racing closer and closer towards the fallen tree. Caine saw a long stretch of mudflat speed by as the bank of the island flattened out and dipped down to meet the river. A row of wooden shacks jutted out from the desolate swampland. He turned and pushed both sticks backwards, forcing the vehicle into a quick turn to port. The airboat spun in the water and flew up onto the riverbank. The prop wash generated by the massive rear propeller blasted behind them at over 100 miles per hour. It was powerful enough to push the boat across the slick mud-covered earth. Caine fell backwards as the boat surged across the damp ground. Behind them, the other boat raced forward, continuing down the river. Caine heard the shriek of twisted metal and a loud crash as the craft collided with the fallen tree at full speed. He turned and saw the boat's hull flip up and spiral through the air. The impact tore the propeller housing away from the stern of the craft. Looking back towards the bow of his boat, Caine saw they were still speeding across the muddy plain, heading straight towards one of the abandoned shacks. But before he could adjust their course, the mercenary stumbled to his feet and raised his rifle. Caine rolled behind the pilot's seat as gunfire burst through the air above him. He kicked out with his right leg, striking the throttle stick and driving it forward. The boat shuddered as the propeller drove it even faster across the wet terrain. Caine grabbed the side of the boat, bracing for impact. The mercenary narrowed his eyes, then spun around, raising his arm in a defensive gesture. It was too little and too late. Crash! Once again, the boat launched into the air. It flew up a muddy embankment and tore through the rotted wood of the shack's walls. Caine felt the boat tip. He flailed his arms, grabbing for anything he could find to steady himself. His fingers grasped one of the loose mooring ropes. He wrapped it around his arm as his body whipped through the air. The metal hull groaned in protest. It tipped over and spun, tearing through the remains of the shack like a wrecking ball. It exploded out the other side, sending a rain of wooden planks and debris flying through the air. Then it crashed to the ground and rolled over, landing upside down in the mud. The engine continued to roar. The top of the propeller housing was wedged into the mud. The blades still spun inside, sending a fine mist of water and earth into the air. The hull sloped back at an angle. The bow faced the remains of the shack and sank into the soft ground. Caine groaned and lifted his face out of the mud. The roar of the spinning propeller drowned out all other sound. He paused, taking a quick mental assessment of his injuries. Some bruises, some pain, but nothing broken. He felt pressure on his left leg. Looking back, he saw it was wedged between the muddy earth and the overturned hull of the boat. He tugged at it, but the metal hull was too heavy. He could not pull free. He looked around for Blaine. No sign of him. Through the spinning blades of the propeller, Caine saw a blurred landscape. Twisted, desolate trees silhouetted against the setting sun. Then, in the distance, he saw the mercenary, thrown clear from the crash, staggered to his feet. The man wiped dirt and blood from his face. He shook his head, then turned towards the roaring boat engine. He stared at Caine through the blur of the spinning